deep within the endless stretches of the African savanna, nestled among towering baobab trees and golden grasses swaying in the breeze, lay the enigmatic village of Kanjamba, a place so isolated that its name was barely whispered beyond the surrounding hills. Kanjamba held a mystery untouched by time or outsiders. It was a realm where traditions intertwined with secrecy, and even the wind seemed to carry whispers of untold stories. Omari, a young and determined anthropologist, had traveled days through rugged terrain to reach this remote enclave. His fascination with uncovering the hidden histories of Africa's interior had brought him to Kanjamba, a village whose customs were said to defy the passage of time. For Omari, this was more than research. It was a quest to understand the soul of a people through the stories they guarded so fiercely. As he approached the outskirts of the village, the sun bathed the landscape in hues of orange and gold, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him like silent warnings. The villagers, though cautious, allowed Omari to enter their space, their watchful eyes following his every move. On his first evening there, he stumbled upon an extraordinary scene, a gathering unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Men, women, and children formed a semicircle around a roaring fire, their voices rising in a rhythmic chant that reverberated through the air. Their songs carried an ancient melody, haunting yet beautiful, and Omari couldn't help but feel drawn into its rhythm. It was then that he noticed something extraordinary. Among the villagers, scattered like stars in the night sky, were individuals whose skin bore a faint, bluish hue. At first, he thought it was a trick of the firelight, a mere illusion caused by shadows dancing across their bodies. But as he looked closer, the truth became undeniable. The hue was not an illusion, it was real. The sight left him stunned, his scientific curiosity now ignited with an intensity he hadn't felt before. What could explain this? He wondered, his thoughts racing. The questions spilled over before he could restrain them. Summoning his courage, he approached an elder seated on a carved wooden stool, her presence commanding yet serene. "Excuse me, Mama," he began hesitantly, his voice breaking the rhythm of the chants. "Why do some of you have this color?" The elder's eyes, sharp and discerning, met his with a gaze that seemed to peer into his very soul. For a moment, she said nothing, her silence heavier than words. Around them, the murmurs of the villagers faded into a tense quiet. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm. "In Kanjamba, we do not answer questions that have not yet earned their time," she said cryptically before turning back to the fire. Feeling a mixture of rejection and intrigue, Omari took a step back, uncertain of what to do next. Just as he began to retreat, a tug at his sleeve stopped him. Turning, he saw a young girl, no older than 10, her bright eyes filled with a mischievous spark. "If you want to know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames, "you must ask the river." Her words were strange, yet they held an inexplicable weight. Before he could ask what she meant, she slipped away, disappearing into the crowd like a shadow. Omari stood frozen, her cryptic message looping in his mind. The river? What did it have to do with the blue-skinned villagers? That night, sleep eluded him. He lay on a makeshift cot in the hut offered by his hosts, his thoughts tangled in the mystery. Every detail of the day replayed in his mind. The blue skin, the elder's stern gaze, the girl's whisper. He felt as though he had stumbled into a story far older than himself, one that demanded to be unraveled piece by piece. But as the stillness of the night enveloped him, a new emotion took root within him: obsession. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the savannah, Omari resolved to find the river. It was no longer a question of choice. It was a compulsion, a need that gnawed at his very being. Somewhere in Kanjamba, he was certain, lay the answers he sought. And if the river held the key to the secret of the blue-skinned villagers, then that was where he needed to go. Omari walked through the dusty paths of Kanjamba, the rising sun painting the village in hues of amber and gold. The air was thick with the scent of freshly tilled earth, and the distant sounds of children's laughter intertwined with the occasional call of birds perched high on the ancient baobab trees. Despite the serenity, his mind raced with unanswered questions. The girl's cryptic words from the night before, "Ask the river," echoed in his thoughts, but he knew he needed a guide, someone who could bridge the gap between his curiosity and the villagers' guarded silence. All signs pointed to one person, Mama Liabu, known across Kanjamba as a living archive of wisdom. Mama Liabu was said to carry the stories of generations in her heart. Omari found her seated beneath the largest baobab tree in the village, its gnarled roots spreading out like the veins of the earth itself. She worked with steady hands, weaving strips of palm into intricate patterns that seemed to tell their own tales. Her silver hair shimmered in the dappled sunlight, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, tracked Omari as he approached. He stopped a respectful distance away, his voice measured but tinged with urgency. "Mama Liabu," he began, "I've come to learn about Kanjamba's secrets. I mean no disrespect, but I must ask, why are some of the villagers blue-skinned?" His words hung in the air, carried away momentarily by a soft breeze. Mama Liabu paused her weaving and looked up, her piercing gaze locking onto him. For a moment, the world around them seemed to still, as though the trees, the wind, and even the earth itself awaited her response. "Outsiders," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of countless stories, "often come with curiosity, but they leave with regret. Do you truly wish to carry the weight of our truths, young man?" Her question was more than rhetorical. It felt like a test. Omari hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. The thought of regret unsettled him, but his determination outweighed his doubt. "Yes," he replied, his voice firm despite the knot tightening in his chest. "I need to understand, not just for my work, but because your story deserves to be told." Mama Liabu leaned back against the baobab, her eyes narrowing as if to measure the sincerity of his words. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded slowly. "Very well, but know this. The blue is neither a curse nor a blessing. It is a story written in blood and water, in pain and survival. To understand it, you will need courage. Not the kind found in books or spoken words, but the kind that can bear the weight of buried truths." Omari's pulse quickened as her words stirred a mix of intrigue and apprehension within him. "What do you mean by blood and water?" he asked cautiously. Mama Liabu's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. "The answers you seek are not found here in the village," she said. "They lie with the Moyo Wamaji, the river of life. But be warned, the river does not merely give answers. It reveals truths, some of which you may wish to forget." Her words sent a chill through Omari, even as the heat of the day began to rise. The idea of the river, mentioned again after the girl's mysterious whisper, ignited a spark of both hope and fear. "What kind of truths?" he pressed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Mama Liabu's gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained grave. "Truths that bind us to the land and to our ancestors. Truths that cannot be unlearned once they are seen." Omari swallowed hard, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. Turning back now would mean abandoning the mystery that had consumed him since his arrival, but stepping forward meant embracing the unknown, with all its potential dangers. The gravity of his decision hung heavy in the air, but he knew his choice had already been made. "How do I find the river?" he asked finally, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning within him. Mama Liabu gestured to the eastern horizon, where the first hints of dense forest could be seen beyond the fields. "Follow the path where the trees grow closest to one another," she said. "You will hear the river before you see it. But remember this, the river's waters are not ordinary. They hold memories, ours and those who came before us. Step carefully, for once you enter its embrace, you will not leave unchanged." Omari nodded, the elder's words filling him with a mix of dread and anticipation. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him once more. "And Omari," she called, her tone softer now, almost maternal, "the river gives only to those who approach with open hearts. If yours is clouded with greed or arrogance, it will show you nothing but sorrow." Her warning lingered in his mind as he walked away, each step toward the forest heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Omari knew he had crossed a threshold, one where there was no turning back. The answers he sought were closer than ever, but so too were the dangers of uncovering truths long hidden. And though he did not yet know it, the river would indeed change everything. As the first rays of sunlight painted the savannah with hues of gold and crimson, Omari set out from the village with Zuberi by his side. The child, with her quick steps and curious eyes, carried a quiet confidence, as if she understood the weight of the journey ahead better than he did. The air was cool, filled with the earthy scent of morning dew and the distant hum of insects awakening. Omari clutched his journal tightly, though he knew no words could fully capture what lay ahead. Zuberi, walking a few steps ahead, turned to him with a look that seemed far too wise for her years. "The river changed us generations ago," she began, her voice soft yet firm, as though she were reciting a lesson passed down through countless stories. "My grandmother says it was the will of the spirits. Others," she paused, her expression darkening, "others say it was punishment for greed." Her words hung heavy in the air, weaving a tension that gnawed at Omari's curiosity. He wanted to press her for details, but hesitated, sensing that this story was not one to be rushed. As they walked deeper into the wilderness, the lush greenery of the savannah gave way to dense foliage. The sound of water, faint at first, grew louder with each step, a rhythmic murmur that seemed to call to them. Zuberi stopped abruptly, her small hand raised to silence him. "We're close," she whispered. The trees here grew impossibly tall, their twisted branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight in fragmented patterns on the forest floor. The air was cooler, tinged with the metallic scent of something ancient, something alive. When they finally reached the river, Omari's breath caught in his throat. The water shimmered unnaturally, its surface rippling with an iridescent blue glow that seemed almost alive. It wasn't just water, it was a living, breathing entity pulsing with an energy that defied explanation. Omari crouched by the riverbank, his eyes tracing the gentle flow of the current. "Why does it look like this?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Zuberi knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the water. "Only those ready to face the past can step into the water," she said, her tone solemn. "It will show you what you seek, but it will not hide the pain." Omari hesitated. He had come this far, driven by a need to understand, but the weight of her words pressed against his resolve. He reached out cautiously, dipping his hands into the cool, glistening water. As the liquid touched his skin, a tingling sensation shot through him, not unpleasant, but entirely unfamiliar. Then, without warning, his vision blurred, the world around him dissolving into a swirl of light and shadow. In an instant, he was no longer by the river. He stood in a scene from another time, a Kanjamba of the past. The land was vibrant, teeming with life, its people thriving in harmony with the earth. But the peace was shattered by the arrival of strangers, foreign miners with machines that tore through the soil like hungry beasts. Omari watched, helpless, as the land was stripped bare, its rich veins of minerals harvested without regard for the people or the sacred river that sustained them. The water, once clear and pure, turned dark and sickly, poisoned by the greed of those who saw only profit. The vision shifted, revealing the villagers' struggle to survive. Their crops withered, their livestock weakened, and their own bodies began to change. The first signs were subtle, a faint blue tint to the skin, dismissed as a passing illness. But as the years passed, the blue deepened, marking them in ways that could not be ignored. Omari saw their pain, their fear, but also their resilience. The people of Kanjambo adapted, turning their suffering into strength. They embraced the blue as a symbol of their survival, a reminder of the sacrifices their ancestors had made. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Omari gasping on the riverbank, his hands still wet with the shimmering water. His heart pounded, the images seared into his mind. He turned to Zuberi, who watched him with an expression that was both knowing and sad. "Now you understand," she said quietly. Omari nodded, though his thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. The river had shown him the truth, but it had also burdened him with the weight of Kanjamba's history. As the sound of the flowing water filled the silence, Omari realized that the story he sought was far greater than he had imagined. It was not just a tale of survival, but a testament to the resilience of a people who had turned tragedy into identity. And yet, he could not shake the feeling that the river held even more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Omari's senses returned slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping over a dark horizon. He felt the dampness of the ground beneath him and the coolness of Zuberi's small hands steadying his shoulders. His heart still raced, and his breathing came in short, shallow bursts as if he had run a great distance. "You saw them, didn't you?" Zuberi's voice was soft but carried a weight that demanded no denial. Omari nodded, unable to speak, the images from the vision still seared into his mind. The miners, the destruction, the poisoned river. It was more than history. It was an open wound carved into the soul of Kanjamba. He stood slowly, his legs trembling, and Zuberi offered him silent support. The walk back to the village felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken truths. Omari's mind swirled with questions, each one louder than the last. How could such a story remain hidden? How had the villagers borne such a burden in silence? By the time they reached the heart of Kanjamba, his determination had solidified into a fiery need for answers. He strode toward the baobab tree where Mama Liabu sat, her hands once again weaving patterns into her baskets. The rhythmic movement seemed almost meditative, but Omari's voice broke through the calm like thunder. "Why do you hide this history?" he demanded, his tone sharp, a reflection of his inner turmoil. "The world must know what was done to your people. They poisoned your land, your water, your bodies. They stole from you, and yet no one speaks of it. Why?" His words came in a rush, unfiltered and raw. The other villagers nearby turned to watch, their expressions unreadable, their eyes heavy with something Omari could not yet name. Mama Liabo did not answer immediately. She finished a loop in her weaving, her hands deliberate and steady, as if time itself bent to her will. Then she looked up, her piercing gaze meeting his with the force of years lived and battles fought. "Do you think the world cares about a small village in the middle of nowhere?" she asked, her voice calm but unyielding. "Do you think the world will mourn for Kanjamba as we mourn for our ancestors? No, Almighty. The world moves on, forgetting the small and the powerless. But we remember." Her words struck Omari like a physical blow, but he refused to back down. "This isn't just about remembering," he insisted, his voice rising with urgency. "This is about justice. If people knew, if they understood the pain and the resilience of Kanjamba, maybe something could change. Maybe they would finally see the truth." Mama Liabu's sigh was deep, carrying the weight of decades, perhaps centuries, of unspoken pain. She set down her weaving and gestured for Omari to sit. When he hesitated, she spoke again, her tone softening. "See, Omai, you speak of justice, but justice is not as simple as you believe." He lowered himself to the ground, his anger tempered by the quiet authority in her voice. "The blue skin," she began, "is more than a mark of suffering. It is a symbol of endurance, of transformation. Our ancestors turned poison into power. They adapted, survived, and created something beautiful from something meant to destroy us. Would you strip us of that pride by exposing our wounds to the world?" Omari opened his mouth to protest, but found himself at a loss for words. Her question lingered in the air, a challenge he wasn't sure how to answer. He had seen the pain of the past, yes, but he had also seen the strength it had forged. The blue skin, once a scar, had become a badge of survival, a reminder of the people's unbreakable spirit. But still, the injustice gnawed at him. "Don't you want the world to know your strength?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Don't you want your story to inspire others?" Mama Liabo's eyes softened, and for a moment, Omari thought he saw a flicker of sadness behind her stern exterior. "Strength does not require recognition," she said. "We are not defined by what the world thinks of us. Kanjamba survives because we choose to protect what is ours, our history, our pride, our people. To share it is to risk losing it, to risk outsiders coming again, taking again. Her words settled over Omari like a heavy cloak, wrapping him in their truth. He realized then that his perspective, shaped by the outside world, might not align with what Kunjamba needed. The people had built their lives around their history, not to dwell in pain, but to draw strength from it. Exposing that history to the world might bring attention, but it could also bring exploitation, misunderstanding, or even pity, none of which the villagers sought. Still, a part of him rebelled against the idea of letting such a story remain buried. He looked at Mama Liabu, his expression conflicted. "But doesn't silence allow injustice to continue?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't it give power to those who wronged you?" Mama Liabu's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was tinged with melancholy. "Silence, Omari, is not the absence of resistance. It is our way of choosing how we resist. Some stories are not meant for the world. They are meant for those who live them, those who carry them. We do not hide because we are ashamed. We guard because we are proud." Omari sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking into his bones. The vision from the river replayed in his mind, each scene a testament to both suffering and resilience. He realized that he had approached Kunjamba with the arrogance of an outsider, believing that the world needed to know their story. But now, he saw the layers of complexity, the delicate balance the villagers had struck between remembering and moving forward. And as the villagers resumed their daily routines, their quiet strength spoke louder than any words ever could. Omari's resolve hardened as he walked through the village, his mind a storm of conviction and doubt. Mama Liabu's words echoed in his thoughts, cautioning against exposing Kunjamba's history, but he could not shake the belief that their story deserved to be heard. The resilience he had witnessed, the strength forged through pain, was something the world could learn from. As the villagers went about their day, tending to crops and weaving baskets under the shade of the baobab trees, Omari called out to them, his voice filled with urgency. "Please gather around. I have something important to say." Slowly, they assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Among them stood Zuberi, her bright eyes filled with anticipation, and Mama Liabu, her expression unreadable, but her presence commanding as ever. Omari took a deep breath, the weight of his words pressing heavily on his chest. "I've seen what the river revealed," he began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "I've seen the suffering your ancestors endured, the injustice that was done to this land, and the strength you've carried through generations. The world needs to know your story, not just the pain, but the resilience, the way you turned tragedy into a symbol of survival." His words stirred a ripple of reactions among the villagers. Some nodded in quiet agreement, their faces softening with a hint of hope, while others exchanged wary glances, their expressions clouded with doubt. Zuberi stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's right. If people knew what we've been through, they would understand how strong we are. They would respect us." But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. An older man named Jabari, his arms crossed and his stance firm, spoke up. "And what would that respect bring us, child? Outsiders have only ever taken from Kunjamba. They took our land, our water, our health. Why should we trust them now?" A murmur of agreement rose from those who shared Jabari's fears. The air grew heavy with tension as the villagers began to argue, their voices rising in a cacophony of conflicting opinions. Some, like Zuberi, saw an opportunity to reclaim their narrative, while others, like Jabari, feared that exposing their story would invite new exploitation. Omari watched helplessly as the debate spiraled, the unity he admired beginning to fracture before his eyes. It was Mama Liabu who restored order. She raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent, her authority commanding their respect. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. "Enough," she said, her tone cutting through the tension like a blade. "Omari speaks from a place of good intentions, but intentions alone do not protect a village. Kunjamba has survived because we decide what we share and what we protect, We cannot allow our story to be taken from us again." Her words brought a hush over the crowd, their conflicting emotions simmering just beneath the surface. Omari stepped forward, his voice quieter now, but no less earnest. "I don't want to take your story," he said, addressing the elder directly. "I want to help you share it on your terms. The world can learn so much from what you've endured and how you've triumphed. But only if you're willing." Mama Liabu studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching his face for any trace of deceit. Finally, she nodded slowly. "If we speak, it will be on our terms," she said firmly. "You may document our story, but you must celebrate our strength and preserve our dignity. The pain is ours to carry, but the resilience is what we choose to share." Omari felt a surge of relief and gratitude, though he understood the responsibility that had just been placed on his shoulders. He nodded solemnly, meeting her gaze with unwavering determination. "I promise," he said, "I will honor your story." The villagers began to disperse, their discussions continuing in hushed tones. But the divide between them had not fully healed. Zuberi stayed behind, her eyes shining with hope. "You'll tell the world about us, won't you?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of innocence and conviction. Omari knelt to meet her gaze, a soft smile breaking through his seriousness. "Yes," he said, "but only the parts you want them to know." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the village in warm hues of orange and gold, Omari realized that the journey was far from over. He had been given permission, but the task ahead was daunting. He would need to navigate the delicate balance between truth and preservation, between honoring the past and protecting the future. And as Mama Liabu watched from her place beneath the baobab tree, her expression unreadable, Omari knew that the story of Kanjamba was no longer just theirs. It was now his responsibility too. Omari spent weeks immersed in the life of Kanjamba, each day peeling back another layer of its rich and complex history. His mornings began with the rhythmic sounds of the village waking, roosters crowing, women pounding grain, and children's laughter echoing through the narrow paths. The scent of wood smoke and freshly baked flatbread lingered in the air as he moved from hut to hut, his notebook in hand, his recorder ready to capture the voices of the villagers. Each story he heard was a thread in the intricate tapestry of their shared past, and he wove these threads together with care, knowing the weight of what he carried. The villagers, initially hesitant, began to open up as they saw Omari's respect for their lives and their history. Elderly men recounted tales of resilience during the darkest days, their voices heavy with emotion but steady with pride. Women shared songs that had been passed down through generations, melodies that carried both sorrow and hope. Zuberi, always at his side, introduced him to the dances performed during the annual harvest celebration. The movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, and Omari could see how they mirrored the undulating flow of the river itself. The dance was not just an art form, but a living reminder of their connection to the land and the water that shaped them. Omari's days were filled with discoveries, but it was in the quiet moments of reflection that the weight of what he was documenting truly sank in. He often sat by the river, watching its iridescent waters shimmer under the sun, and thought about the generations who had drawn life from it despite its poison history. The villagers had transformed their suffering into a source of identity, and their blue skin, once a mark of tragedy, had become a badge of resilience. He realized that this story was not about victimhood, it was about the triumph of the human spirit. As the weeks turned into a month, Omari knew his time in Kanjamba was coming to an end. The villagers had shared their lives with him, and he had captured not just their words but their essence. On his final evening, the village gathered around the fire for a farewell celebration. Songs and laughter filled the air, and the warmth of the fire reflected the bonds that had formed between Omari and the people of Kanjamba. Zuberi approached him with a small vial in her hands, the liquid inside glowing faintly blue in the firelight. "Take this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's a part of our river, a reminder of our story. But remember, it doesn't define us. We are more than what happened to us." Omari accepted the vial with a nod, his throat tight with emotion. The next morning he left Kanjamba, the sounds of the village fading behind him as he journeyed back to the city. The vial sat in his pocket, a tangible connection to the people who had entrusted him with their legacy. He worked tirelessly for months, piecing together the stories, songs, and images into a cohesive narrative. The result was a documentary titled The Spirit of Kanjamba. It was not a sensationalized tale of blue-skinned villagers, but a profound exploration of a community that had turned pain into strength, tragedy into beauty. When the documentary was released, it resonated with audiences worldwide. Critics praised it not for the anomaly of the blue skin, but for its heartfelt portrayal of resilience and unity. People from different walks of life found inspiration in the story of Kanjamba, and Omari's work sparked conversations about the importance of preserving cultural narratives on their own terms. But amidst the acclaim, Omari remained grounded, knowing that his role had been that of a storyteller, not a savior. Back in Kanjamba, life continued as it always had. The villagers tended their crops, danced their dances, and sang their songs. They knew of the documentary's success, but it did not change who they were. Their story had reached the world, but they remained the keepers of their truth, unshaken by the attention. For them, the greatest triumph was not in being seen, but in knowing that their legacy, carried now by Omari, had been shared with dignity and respect. The river still flowed, its waters shimmering with a timeless glow, a silent witness to the unbreakable spirit of Kanjamba. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.